We're going to start with the easy question. After Sean's exciting presentation, we hardly need to say that the TV and video advertising markets are going through a period of change. And we also know that these changes have implications for the institutional arrangements which underpin transparency, accountability, innovation, and measurement in our good marketplace. And unsurprisingly, as marketplace changes, there's a reasonable debate to be had about whether those arrangements need to change as well. And so what I was hoping to do to get the ball rolling is just ask our panelists, each in turn, to give us their sense of whether the current arrangements that are in place are working well and fit for purpose, or whether you think there are things that we should improve or change and try to do better. And I'm going to start in a completely provocative way with Scott at that end, and then we'll come round to George, because then you can respond. And I want to say a massive thank you to George for joining us on stage in beard-free fashion. I think it's the first unveiling of the new look and feel. Scott, give us your sense. What's working well from a kind of governance, institutional oversight point of view, and what do you think maybe we should think about differently?
I mean, it's a huge question, and I think it's super complicated. And I'm going to comment on the governance side of things rather than the transparency side of things. I think these are related but somewhat separate topics. I mean, I think as we just saw in the previous presentation, and I think as everyone has lived, as long as you've been in ad tech or martech, there's a lot of opacity. There's a lot of borderline or explicit fraud and bad behavior. There's enormous amount of money moving against all that behavior, and it's not benefiting anybody except for the shadier folks in the ecosystem, or the ones who have less integrity and don't actually serve the interests of the stakeholders they're taking money from. So, I think I made the case a few months ago, for better or for worse, that markets run better when there is trust. Whether it's a country or it's a market or it's two people having a conversation or trading something. So we need trust. Trust comes from a common belief in the standards that can be set. And I think that there's a absolute need for governance. Like, no one doesn't want governance. I think that the problem is when the market, especially when you're in a technology-driven market where innovation can run really, really fast, the danger is when the innovation in the market outstrips the ability of the governance entity to govern in a way that maybe is as relevant as it could be. And this sounds like I'm taking pot shots at the MRC, and I am not. I mean, I myself went for MRC accreditation, my little tiny company, to serve the needs of a big client, and didn't follow through with that. Anyway, so I think that we want governance. Everybody wants governance. I think there needs to be agreement about the structure and mandate for the governing entity. And I think that we are falling short, for whatever reasons, in the ability to collectively agree on what that governance should look like and how we would proceed. I mean, just the punchline is, like, everybody wants rebar in our concrete buildings. Like, you just want to be certain that I'm getting what I paid for, that I'm going to have an experience that's fair, that there's equal opportunity for competition, that there's opportunity for innovation. And I think we've gone so far past those objectives that we need to rethink, all of us, including the incumbent governing agency, what can be done to catch up and provide more standards, transparency, and provide that level of efficiency, so we're all trading on a common understanding of the value of the thing being traded.
Celeste? Thank you, Scott. Celeste?
So I'm going to take it from a measurement perspective, right? So big data is helping us modernize measurement, right? However, that is just one piece of the puzzle. The future of measurement will be, big data, panel data, and first-party data, right? And I in my little silo cannot validate the efficacy of these metrics alone, right? So I need governance, and I need folks to help me validate and tell me that the data is reliable for me and my clients. On the flip side of things, what I'm seeing in the current measurement space are these gaps that we shouldn't ignore. And I would hate to continue down this road without adequate measurement for multicultural audiences and out of home and over the air syndication and long tail networks. So I think some of it, I think it's easy to say, hey, the MRC has to do this or the JIC has to do that, but it's incumbent on the measurement partners and providers to come to the table with a view of the entire ecosystem, right? So if we, as we are engulfing on this transformative space in measurement, we cannot let these gaps go unchecked. We need to make sure that these gaps are filled in, because once interoperability is in place, the demand to trade on non-legacy measurement will be paramount. And then we'll be circling our tails for the next 60 years, figuring out why marketers and brands cannot connect to the growing segments that are in the gaps. So that's the position that I'm taking.
Celeste, it's a great opening position. Minette, after you, what is in place and working well from your point of view, and where do you think we need to have another look?
Yeah, so look, I agree with both. I just want to add, we are seeing massive changes in the marketplace in the video as you outlined. But I also think this is a golden age for measurement. There's massive innovation, and we would not be talking about this. And so there's a lot of disruption with that. I think if you look at the other side of the coin, there's massive innovation. Like with big data, you're talking about identity and an attribution is the first time you could get the exposure and ROI computed on the same data set through Cleanroom. This was not possible even, a year back. So there's a lot going on, but I think what I wanted to highlight one point is the issue of standards. I feel that we are moving in different directions, fast and quick, and lack of standards are being used now, to use the word, somebody who told me that, as a competitive advantage by a lot of players out in the marketplace. And I feel like the standards needs to be in place as we are introducing new innovations, and because that's where I sense that there's a little bit of confusion. And I'll give you some examples. And one example I would say, just let's stick that we had one topic very recently, which Sean mentioned up here about streaming, first-party streaming data. I mean, I don't know if there are standards in terms of how to clean, aggregate, that data asset. Subscribe, these are billing information, and what billing information is necessary to support a audience measurement, that these needs to be written up, agreed upon, right? The third is, there are a bunch of models, and they have attributes in the features in the model, and these are deep learning models sometimes straightforward machine learning models. You run some of them and you're a vendor, so I could say that, right? There's no visibility in those models. So I feel like there needs to be a refocus on writing some consensus in the industry and build those standards, so somebody like MRC or auditing body can audit against that, because right now there's a confusion.
Okay, and I think possibly coming from a very different perspective is Ariel. Ariel, do you want to tell us quickly about your background, because it's kind of fascinating, and then give us your sense of what you think is in place and working well, and where there's still stuff to be done or rethought.
Sure. So my name is Ariel Garcia. I 3 weeks ago very publicly quit my job as Chief Privacy and Responsibility Officer at UM. I did that via op-ed, and I wrote in that op-ed about conflicts of interest and opacity plaguing the ecosystem. And so the perspective that I'm coming at this from, obviously the breadth of my experience has really been on the privacy side, but the recent Analytics Made for Kids report was a bit of the convergence of all of these issues into one, and it was an epiphany for me, because I understood there that, it would be easy to say, for example, well, Performance Max performs well, we don't want to pause spending on PMax. What about those campaigns? And in reality, we're optimizing to toddlers having sticky little fingers and clicking ads by accident. And so to your point, to have governance in the absence of standards and to lack transparency, it's all kind of just putting a gold star on nothing. And I would add that while governance plays an important role, I also believe that advertisers need to do more to drive accountability down the supply chain. Like in this next chapter of whatever I'm doing, that's a big part of my goal. I think, to some extent, advertisers have in some cases been done a disservice by agencies that aren't surfacing these things or giving them the importance that I believe that they deserve. And so while governance and standards are one thing, independent audits by advertisers can be incredibly powerful. And so that would be something that I think would work hand in hand to bring the market to a better place.
So George, I mean, it is such an interesting time in our marketplace, and you've been heroically manning the helm at the MRC for many years. And as I sit in MRC sessions and see the incredible rigor with which you go through the methodologies of the vendors applying for accreditation, I think almost everyone in the industry would say, the MRC does an amazing job. But it's also a sticky wicket to play, as we would say in the UK. Justin Sampson of Barb, who I'm sure lots of you have heard as one of the great sages of JICland, likes to say that in measurement, we can either be fast or we can be right, but it's very hard to do both at the same time. And I sometimes feel that our institutional bodies are a bit stuck between a rock and a hard place, between the desire to be rigorous and provide oversight and transparency on the solutions in the marketplace, but at the same time, playing catch up with a market developing at a breakneck pace. Give us your sense of the landscape from a kind of institutional point of view.
I mean, it's a very big question to boil,
Sure.
But I'll do my best. First of all, I think as was acknowledged, we operate in a very complex marketplace with a lot of vendors, with a lot of measurers, some of which aren't vendors to the point of Sean's presentation. They measure themselves. In the middle of that, there are a lot of measurement claims surfacing, and some of those claims are nothing more than R&D that get escalated to some form of legitimacy. So it's a scary place right now if you're an advertiser when you're investing, because you look at the places where you have invested and you've got doubts, and you look at the places that are shouting for your investments, and some of them are shaded and opaque. Some of them are pretty transparent. I'm going to not be totally down. And then you've got a lot of new stuff, and you're wondering, like, where should I place my bets? You insert into that the behavior of the consumer and the fact that first-party data is, I think, going to become pretty indispensable in the measurement equation. And I think Celeste recognized that. And the problem with that is when you start turning over first-party data, you open up a myriad of privacy concerns. And the people that own that data, like large broadcaster publishers, they want to understand what the custody of that is, the chain of where that data goes, because they're exposed. The laws say you give somebody data, it's got PII in it, you're also responsible if they misuse it. So you see the evolution of things like JICs, where people are saying, okay, if we're going to start turning over our first-party data, we got to know where that goes. We got to have some rules in who gets that and what vendor plays with that data, and we think that's entirely legitimate. We also think it's legitimate that we run a voluntary process. We do not have governmental authority or legal authority to mandate that Nielsen has its RPD Plus markets audited, which, by the way, are more than 50% of the DMAs in the U.S. that are not audited, right? It's an entire video television ecosystem that's not audited. But there's a lot of not audited stuff at Google. There's a lot of non-audited stuff at Meta. There's a lot of not audited stuff at Amazon or at virtually every measure you look at. So I think one good thing that's boiled up here is that there should be a focus on audit and governance scopes. Just what is audited and what is not audited, we tell the members of MRC that until we're purple, but there's an entire outside world that may not know that, and it's complex. And forcing deeper penetration of validation and trust building is a good thing. Along with that first-party influx, you have a big problem, which is going to whack us in the head, called identity maintenance. And that's a huge issue that we need to tackle as an industry. How to do that right, how to do that compliant, and still provide value in our ecosystem. So it's a very complex thing. The MRC does set standards. We set standards on cross-media measurement. We set standards, on outcome measurement. We set standards on invalid traffic infiltration. If you come to an MRC digital committee meeting, if you're an MRC member, you will see that every single meeting we talk about invalid traffic and fraud, and we talk about auditing that and where we go right and where we go wrong. Every meeting. If you think we don't concentrate on invalid traffic and fraud, it's because you haven't been to a meeting. Because we're a mile deep in it. We've written the standard over 3 times, and we still write it. We're about to release another guidance document on invalid traffic and fraud. The bad guys move around. We have to move around. And are we behind? Yes, we are. We have 7 people at MRC. 7. 2 of them are admins. And for that, we do governance. The reason is because we have the world's worst funding model. We only rely on membership, and it's hard as heck to get people to join our organization. They don't care. They care when they want to be quoted, but they don't care when they got to pay $17,000 to be a member and come to meetings and listen to invalid traffic and fraud discussions. Suddenly, they don't want to do that. So we have a terrible funding model, and we have to extend that over an entire industry.
Can I ask George, and just again, for sake of clarity, because I find this fascinating. Who decides your funding model and how do you change it? I mean, because if the argument was a better funded, well-tooled MRC with teeth, that would imply more funding and more headcount. Yeah. But who decides?
Well, first of all, let me just give you a little bit of history. When the MRC was formed, and this is ancient history, it's 1963, the government said, MRC, set standards and do auditing. And then they said, there's another organization we want to form, and that's called CONTAM. I want to hear anybody in the room who's ever heard of CONTAM. There's a few people. The Committee on National Television Audience Measurement. It existed until about 1999, and what they did was do research on the science of measurement and tried to improve the science of measurement. They did the CONTAM study of Nielsen, how to run a panel, how to improve a panel, how to recruit people, how to deal with children and get them to comply, but do it in a privacy-safe way so you're not whacking them out. There's a lot of different things that they did. Guess what? That organization was terminated. MRC was never designed to do that. Maybe SIM could do it. Maybe the JIC could do it. No, somebody. I'm not asking.
It seems like a really grim job to me.
It's a grim job. But, the MRC, I think we're very capable of doing what we do. We do it extremely well. And when we go to make funding decisions, we have to go to the U.S. Department of Justice. And the last time I did that, I went to the Department of Justice and I said, you know what would be great? We could hire 10 more people if we could take every measurement service that applies for accreditation and tack on a charge of 1% of their audit fee that goes to MRC. Because right now, MRC makes no money on an audit. You know what the DOJ said? No. Because we want you to be completely independent from who you audit, that you don't receive any money from them. What you should do is go raise membership dues and get more members. That's what they said.
So
that's what my board thinks about that, who's made up of the people that pay the dues. They don't like raised dues too much.
I feel your pain, I have to say. And just to be clear, SIM has announced already that we are freezing our rates in 2024. I just wanted to be very clear. It's great value. So listening to all of you talk, the interesting thing about the US marketplace from the point of view of a Brit who's arrived from a market which is has slightly fewer households than there are on Comcast's footprint, has a slightly less revenue than Scripps in total TV ad spend, just to be clear, is that you arrive and you think, this is an extraordinary marketplace. There's this incredible mix of big buyers and sellers with huge resources, teams of data scientists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's fucking chaos. I mean, there's so much stuff going on, and there's nothing to stop anybody announcing anything they want. And it results, it seems to me, in confusion. Celeste, I just wanted to ask you quickly whether you think that the buyers feel that confusion. So, and just to give you one example of what I meant, and this is, I'm quoting from something somebody said to me. I'm a bit confused. It seems to me possible for someone to be MRC accredited as a measurement vendor, refuse certification by the JIC, and then certified by NBCU for their measurement scheme. They could be a measurement partner for Paramount at the same time, but then rejected for use by several agencies. Is that the kind of confusion that we have to deal with?
I think we have to get beyond the headlines, right? So I think all right, so from the buy side, if we speak to one another, it's called collusion. But on the sell side, when they get together, it's great. And it's, you're just pulling in diversity into the marketplace, right? That's what it's seemed as. The problem that I have is that sometimes when when people say, oh, I've been accredited, it's very small in scope. And then all you hear is accreditation. You will see also things like, there's a pre-certification based on what? A written methodology. That should not, those headlines, we have to dig deeper. And that's what we do. That's what our teams are doing. We're digging deeper. But the problem is that it's already out there in the universe. So people believe, hey, well, this person is certified for what? And that's where that's the missing link. For me, I want transparency, I want reliability, I want accuracy, right? Across platform. I don't want just television. I want it all. And I also want the growth sectors of the U.S. to be represented in that measurement, which we don't have. And no one's talking about that. And I think it's a missed opportunity.
Arielle, I know from our conversations, you are broadly on the same page as Celeste, that the buyers, the advertisers, the brands are not yet well informed enough about some of these issues and are looking for guidance and clarity, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you're exactly right that there's a tendency to look at the headlines and there's a tendency to capitalize on those headlines when the scope of what's actually been accredited is not exactly the way that it's been presented. One thing that I would say for the MRC is making it easier to understand readily what has been accredited. Like I was trying just as an exercise this morning to see if I could tell if Google search was accredited for brand safety process, and so things like that, are a little bit difficult to tell. And then the only other thing I would add here, and this is kind of within the same vein, is it's hard for me in this skeptical phase of my existence to understand how first-party data, like when you're not actually doing third-party independent certification of your measurement, how that can be regarded at the same level of quality or reliability as the non-walled gardens that are subjecting themselves to more independent oversight.
Let's talk about data then, because a lot of what we're talking about is a marketplace in transition. We're moving from a world defined by linear television and panel-based measurement to a very different marketplace. And I know, Scott, when you and I have spoken in the past, one thing that you've talked a lot about is, from a data science perspective, the processes and complexity of auditing big data sets is very particular. And it's not necessarily one that we as an industry are well geared up. We don't really have clear standards or guidelines for some of that work. There's obviously lots that happens in the MRC, but there's other complexities that you've spoken about in the past. Give us a sense of some of what's on your mind when we talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's unreasonable. It's unreasonable to expect every company who's acquiring data or using data or doing any of these activities required to process a campaign and see it through the supply chain, to be experts in every single element of that supply chain. There's no way you can do that. You can't do it. So that's why brands and agencies turn to a third party to say, we don't have enough resources or expertise to figure this out. You figure this out for us, right? But this comes back to, and I'm totally sympathetic to the MRC charter, which binds George and his team to a certain protocol and I'm totally sympathetic to that. Nevertheless, I mean, companies are getting audited that the implication, they're getting accredited where the implication is that somehow they pass something that really doesn't have anything to do with the quality of the output of their product. And that's a huge disconnect. Like, the accreditation is supposed to say, you can trust this company. It doesn't really get far enough into the meat of what that company does and all these crazy components. And how could it with a bunch of consultants or consultants in the 7-person team? It's unrealistic to expect the way that the MRC is structured to have any impact or even credibility in saying the output of this product is going to be trustworthy and credible, right? So just to talk about data specifically, like, how are we doing audits? How are we accrediting a company without ever looking at the quality of the underlying data sources? I mean, my company measures that stuff. It's generally half wrong all the time, on average. So, you accredit 2 or 3 components of a 14-component system. What does that even mean? And I think, again, sympathetically, you don't want the accreditation to become a rubber stamp. You don't want that. But that's the perception a lot of people in the marketplace have. How can we, again, collectively change that to make it meaningful, give it some teeth? Change the charter. I'm not going to pretend to know your business and know how easy or hard it is to change how you want to do things, but something has to happen where the buy side, everyone understands, hey, I can trust this. And not just one component of a 15 or 20 component process, but like all the way to the output. I can expect, to get what I paid for.
Menak, you've obviously got an interesting position because you've been both measurement vendor side and sell side at Fox now. Are you sympathetic to what Scott says? I mean, and George, I'd love to hear your view because it does raise all these interesting challenges. Data quality is really complex.
Yeah, I think George hinted on a couple of things. Not everything needs to be audited, right? I think this whole idea that any analytics needs to be audited, I don't think that's we shouldn't expect that. I think the currency system needs to be audited because this is where, large brand advertisers and agencies, for us, like, getting into upfront planning and all the process, that's a big effort. And I think those system needs to be audited. So anybody who is playing in a currency environment, I think needs to go through the process. There is a process. It's MRC, whether you like it or not. It is what it is, but it's available. And I think I'm glad that we got the funding discussion over. But I think that's process available. And I think all the parties that want to participate in the current.
No, hold on. It's not available. It's available to companies with a large enough pocketbook to afford $500,000.
Well, you are a startup. You raise money. If your VC wants to get a higher return, you invest because if you go to the audit, your CPM, CPM is going to go up, and you get certain percent of CPM. That's the market you wanted in the first place, right? So I do understand there's overhead on the audit, but I feel like, we are kind of talking from both sides a little bit, saying, okay, if you want to be currency, you need to go through the process. Now, if we believe as a collectively that it's so expensive and it takes a lot of time and effort, I think that needs to be discussed.
And it's worth saying as well, there's a fascinating...
It's a little weird to discuss that we don't audit things deep enough, but then, it's too expensive. We have all kinds of methodologies to audit data, and we employ them, and we have very strong experts within the audit process that understand how data works and science and how to evaluate. Just because there are 7 people at MRC doesn't mean I can't bring to bear 3 CPA firms with the people that can crawl all over you. Now, it could be kind of big.
No, I think what Scott would say, the bar is very high, and the speed at which he needs to move to innovate in the competitive marketplace, that speed may not be available through a process that you have set up.
Yeah,
I think that's
a good point. But what we do say,
Yeah, please. No, dive in. Please.
I'm sorry.
I think the more that I talk and I'm out of the way, better.
There is something about being in the process as opposed to not being in the process. If you're actively engaged in the accreditation process, it might take a little while or a long while, but you're building transparency with a customer base, a very important customer base at the MRC, 170 media companies made up of agencies, advertisers, and media publishers. That is a huge constituency of people that can be exposed to your product prior to it being accredited, and you can move along and use that. We don't tell people that you shouldn't use a product that's in the accreditation process. We don't do that. In fact, it was just a debated thing. Like, I was public in a news article about Nielsen's big data where I said, big data is not accredited, but you know what? Big data can help small outlets, and we don't want to get in the middle as the MRC of promoting zero ratings somewhere where small outlets need ratings. So we're standing down from big data. But guess what? That's true at ComScore too. ComScore's been through 3 audits now, right? And I give them credit. They're at the table improving massively. But guess what? We haven't told anybody they shouldn't use ComScore. It's in the audit process. Come to a ComScore meeting and make your own decisions. They're getting a hell of a lot better at what they do. And you would learn that.
I feel your pain, because my sense is that it's interesting to me that in every TV market, we have a set of institutions that provide transparency and support accountability and so on. And in every market, those institutions are criticized both for being rigorous, but also or for stifling innovation, as the kind of classic phrase. And that's true of every JIC in Europe. They stifle innovation. It's true of what happens here. And what I guess I'm trying to find is a way to move beyond that debate and think, well, okay, how do we transform the way we oversee and deliver governance and transparency in a way that some people argue is more supportive of innovation? Because I hear what you're saying. You're not stopping anybody using products, but at the same time, it's a challenging process because you have to be rigorous, but rigor implies time, resources, and people.
I used to audit a measurement service in Puerto Rico that measured the entire island's television viewing, and it cost $50,000. $50,000.
Celeste wants to come in.
So if I relocate to Puerto Rico, can I get that price on an audit?
We're all going to Puerto Rico. No, I think this space, if it was easy to diversify, it would have been done already, right? This is not something that's easy to do. Sean's presentation clearly laid out it's billions of dollars. We have to be really careful with billions of dollars, and I think the rigor needs to stay in place. I also believe that if you're coming to the table as a currency provider, you should be willing to go through the rigor. You have to play with the big dogs.
And Scott, just to be clear, because you're not coming to the market trying to be a currency contender per se, right?
Listen. I mean, yeah, I don't want to make this about my company, but it's a good example. One of the largest marketers in the world said in a RFP process that took months and months and months for a multi-year, multi-million-dollar deal, said, Scott, choose sets the emotional choice and the intellectual choice, but it's not the financial choice. We need you to get an MRC audit if we're going to roll you out across all of our brands. And I said, okay, I'll go do that. And I can't do that. Like, this is one of my complaints about the structure of, just generally speaking, I know that MRC is not a typical 3-letter agency, but governance is supposed to create fairness in the marketplace, fairness and standards, stop monopolistic practices, give confidence around the accredited entities. And this was a case where it literally did the opposite. It looks from afar, in fairness, that it's supporting the incumbents who have enormous pocketbooks and largely fund the governing agency, and inadvertently stopping innovation for clients or companies rather who are too small to afford the $300,000 to $500,000 price.
The answer, though, doesn't it lie somewhere between? Celeste made a really good comment about standards and guidelines, and what we don't really have at the moment is a kind of clear tiered process. Because I tend to agree with you. If marketeers are looking to transact billions of dollars of ad spend, that should be a really thorough, rigorous process. But there may be there's other ways of developing approaches in the marketplace which can give buyers and sellers confidence, which perhaps work for different types of parties. I'm equally sympathetic. One company said, it's a rigorous process, and it should be, because people are going to spend billions of dollars with us. But we timesheeted, and it took 4-person years of time internally, and that's Scott's entire company for 3 months, during which time nothing else happened.
What did that company do?
It was a well-known measurement vendor.
Like, does it have,
I'm not going
does
to
it
say.
recruit people? Does it do, or is it just a data provider?
No, it was one of the well-known currency-grade
because
vendors.
what goes on is the more that you have human intervention in your measurement, I go out and recruit a panel. I permission that panel. I have to adjust the panel to the marketplace. I have to install metering equipment. I have to do that. Is that a big audit? That's an enormous audit, because people mess up and they have to be audited. But if you've got a data function, if we're talking about Google search, that's actually not that big of an audit compared to a panel audit, because it's basically testing calculative process.
And just briefly, is the implication of that, but if Google search is not accredited, that...
Yeah, I think
we audit Google search,
right?
Audit search,
right?
But you ask if search brand safety was audited. That's not audited.
Right.
We need to audit more brand safety.
No, I
take that away from this meeting.
I want to weigh in. I think, and this is a perspective, and George and I have talked about in the past. Is that a lot of the new forms of audit are algorithmic and heavy computer intensive, and I feel that there is a MRC or the market needs to lean in that expertise. Because a lot of my past company in Nielsen, a lot of, models have been still machine learning, deep learning models. And I have not seen a single, audit done on platforms where they're looking at their deep learning models framework and saying, these are the features that changed, and that's why the outcome is different. But not only that, governing that, because these underlying data assets on the first party or large platform all constantly change. It changes by second. Who is making sure that the updates on those tables are accurate? Now, this is not a E&Y field going and knocking on the door that at Nielsen we used to do. This is somebody you have to write a code that sits on this infrastructure to get the signals back and tell MRC that something has gone wrong or right. So and very humbly, I'll admit, I think MRC may have opportunity here to bring in new skills so that people like Scott and this can move faster. And that way, then Google search, your audit is going to take most likely a year, because you have to go to the privacy and ADH and everything.
Constant.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to admit that we can always improve in this area, but a lot of the things you just talked about, we do.
Yeah.
We do. We look at, you've been to audit meetings. We look at, champion and challenger models, how they're adjusted, how they decide when new models come in, how they alter the data fields, how, when things change, are they monitored? They have to have controls in place to do that. We test those controls and we evaluate them. We do a lot of audit work in those areas, but these are at very big players with very large models, and that can afford that.
Many models.
There is a gap there that we could benefit probably from technology. We can benefit from technology to make us better in that area. There's no question about it.
I still think that, I know you said we could do more audits of brand safety. I think the challenge is this. If the MRC is clear about its scope of what it's looking to accredit and what it is not, that makes it evident where other groups or auditing bodies need to step in, right? So I go back to the Made for Kids example. Not really invalid traffic, certainly not under MRC's definition, right? So but what is that, right? To me, that's something that advertisers and advertiser, trade associations should be talking about. And maybe then they come to you and say, hey, we've made a decision here and we're wondering if this is something the MRC wants to incorporate into their audits. And if not, then it's up to the advertisers to drive accountability on that point, right? But I think for any of that to be clear, the MRC needs to be crystal clear as to not be mistaken as the overall arbiter of trustworthiness.
Is there a case?
Yeah, we don't want to be that.
No.
So I do think there is opportunity for us to be clear. We try that. We try to do that every day on our website. We're trying to get better at it. It was one very powerful thing that came out of the Adalytics study, is that there are several things that Adalytics reference that we don't audit, but it was unclear to the marketplace what's audited or not. We can learn from that and we could get better. There's no
I sort of wonder, thinking out loud, if there's a case for a new body called TTAT, which is the Technical Transformation of Auditing Task Force. And TTAT would essentially look at automated methodologies, modeling approaches, advanced data science techniques that could supplement and support the way we deep dive and invalidate some of the truth claims made by different measurement outputs. Copyrighted, by the way, everyone. I'm just sure. So we are running furiously short of time, and surprisingly, there are 2 cans of beer and a bottle of wine out there for the cocktail hour. I'm joking. We actually have a wonderfully funded cocktail hour, but we are standing in between these good people and that alcohol. So a final word, because we only have a couple minutes left. If there's one thing we do differently to think about this, and I feel what's been valuable to me about this, it's been a really interesting, robust debate, which has heard from different perspectives, which I think is super valuable for the industry. But if there's one thing we should try to do as an industry which supports this process of providing good governance, providing transparency and accountability and confidence and trust in measurement, do you have ideas? Are there things we could propose or explore or do differently, leaving aside TTAT, because I've done that already?
Yeah, look, I think from Fox perspective, I will say that if a company, a firm wants to participate in measurement or analytics, they need to get to audits, because it is very important for us to have an open, transparent, trustworthy platform, measurement platform. And so that's number one. And the other option is JIC, which is, I personally feel that is complementary to what MRC is doing. And I think JIP is a good forum where some of the, innovative approaches are evaluated to the business model. It's more relevancy than actually, is this measurement relevant to my business, which is as a sell side? So I'm extremely interested in seeing people to participate in JIC as well. But if you want to be currency, you got to go to the audit because billions and billions of dollars are dependent on that data.
Any other proposals?
Mine's a super quick one. It's just, I think that it's high time for advertisers to push the platforms on transparency. And I think that that will benefit these efforts along with a number of other efforts and reduce waste.
I know at least one senior executive who spoke earlier who would tend to agree. Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I can't help but echo Mainak's point about I mean, one way or the other, this is a good problem, first of all, right? We're innovating so fast, things are changing so rapidly. I think the overall awareness of everyone in this room and through the supply chain of these problems is a huge step forward. Like, the first step is admitting you have a problem, right? But I think that we need to, the existence of the JIC and the NBCU thing is just a symptom of the shortcoming of where we've been and where we think we need to go. And I think we need to lean into them one way, whether it's the MRC that makes changes that satisfies these more innovative things and more technical, or it's the JIC plays, hand in hand with the MRC, separating currency from all these things are great ideas. Let's just keep pressure. And I think the pressure, to echo your point, has to come from the top. Like the buy side has got to stop, accepting all this mess, and it's got to put pressure on the supply chain partners to be more transparent, to get the audit, to pressure on the auditors to audit more deeply and with more teeth. All these things have to come from the top.
And I think that both of you just mentioned that the JIC is basically a sell-side platform, and that's where the problem lies. If we really want to change what's happening, we have to have radical collaboration between both sides. So I feel like sometimes when I'm sitting in on some of these forums, it is sell-side heavy.
Buy side is part of JIC as well.
Well, no, we are part of JIC, but we get drowned out a lot. So even when we are trying to apply pressure, it's really just sometimes about anti-Nielsen rhetoric.
Many of you will want to come to the big JIC update, which is taking place at the Sim Summit tomorrow, featuring JIC representatives, 2 agencies, and a media owner. George, other than more money, is there...
I'm sorry if I came out.
No, not at all.
We do a lot with the money we have.
But honestly, up until you said that, I'm not sure I would be able to tell you how many people work at the MRC. But you're right. As someone who's working in a relatively small organization, trying to run fast and do a lot, but without honestly having to worry about the same rigor and billions of dollars that you have to worry about, it's an issue. But go on. What were you going to say?
Well, I do think there's a lot of benefit in many of the concepts that have been talked about. For example, making more transparent what's audited and what's not. I think that's a fundamental principle we already agree on, and we learned that very straightforward from the analytics work. One thing that the industry has to understand is that the MRC can't build measurement and then audit it and certify it. That's fundamentally incompatible, right? We can't certify measurement and then build it. So there has to be other people out there that look at the science of measurement and seek to improve it with innovation. And whether that comes from vendors or a JIC or whatever, that's fine. But that's not necessarily an MRC function. We exist to set standards for validation and measurement and audit that for compliance. That's what we do. We have one thing we do. And there's a lot of confusion out there on the part of advertisers and other people because of vendor claims. So one thing you can do is say, go to MRC and be audited. And even if it's a small vendor, we take them on and we try to work with them financially to make that happen. If we're unsuccessful, we share that with our board and the reasons, because they need to know that, because it's not the entity's fault. So we audit some pretty small organizations, actually.
This is a debate which I think we've started, and I'm hoping will continue because it's a really valuable and important debate. A massive thank you to our amazing panel.